Hello, hello, hello. My name is Akita the Coyote, and this is my first attempt at making ASMR. I've been listening to it for about 5 years now, but this is my first attempt at actually producing some content of my own. A little bit about myself. I've also been a furry for about 5 years, since early 2020. Kind of first found out about it during quarantine, as I imagine a lot of other people did. Aside from that, I really enjoy cars and computers mainly. And more specifically, I really enjoy the weirder side of those two categories. I really enjoy the kind of weird, especially the weird commercial enterprise stuff. Like with computers, I really enjoy servers and also scan PDAs, scan personal digital assistants. They are the little devices that your UPS driver might use to scan your packages. They're actually remarkably interesting. I really find interesting the various weird solutions that they use for various problems that they have. And also just the very utilitarian build and design of them. I find it very interesting that they are very function over form. They're not really, the designers didn't really take into account ergonomics. Well, they did ergonomics, but not like looks or anything, how it might feel in the hand, the materials, whatever. They just went with whatever was cheap, easy to work with, and most importantly, basically bulletproof. These things can take an absolute beating. You could basically throw one off of a building and it would probably damage the pavement more than it damaged the device. And there's just something about that that I really find interesting. I also really enjoy servers, especially old servers. Like right now, I have a little pet project going on. I have affectionately dubbed the Chimera. It is a old Dell server that I have cut in half. The motherboard on it was dead, so it wasn't working anyways, but I cut it in half, took out the motherboard, took out the power supplies, all that, and essentially just used the front part that holds all the drives, and I took the host bus adapter, or the RAID card in it, and put it in another computer, and it works remarkably well. It still recognizes all the drives. I can even control it with the little BIOS boot menu, which I'm not certain how that works, since it's really low level in the boot process before any OS is loaded or anything. I'm not really certain how that works. I'm not certain if there's a boot interrupt in the PCIe protocol or something. Who knows? I sure as hell don't. Probably only the Dell engineers do, but that's neither here nor there. I also really enjoy cars, like I said, and much like computers, I don't really enjoy expensive cars. I mean, I do, don't get me wrong, but I've never really been interested in the Bugattis and the Mercedes and the Paganis, the Koenigseggs of the world. I enjoy the weird stuff, the old stuff, the stuff that people don't really care about. Like, for example, the Yugo, which is an Eastern European car made by a company called Zastava in Serbia, if I remember correctly, and they primarily produce guns, but like a lot of Russian companies at the time, or well, Eastern European really, Soviet, I suppose, the companies that dealt in machinery often performed a number of duties. They produced companies like Zastava over time produced guns, cars, tanks, planes, machines for manufacturing stuff, really any number of things because they were set up to produce stuff like that. And a lot of other companies weren't. So oftentimes, whenever there was a time of crisis, a time of war, they would just be thrown whatever manufacturing plans the government needed to be produced in large quantities, and they would just do that. That was also a pretty common thing in the U.S. during World War II. A lot of, like GM, General Motors, they produced a lot of guns, a lot of tanks, number of things. It was a pretty common thing, but especially in Eastern Europe, it was very common. But anyways, the Yugo was produced by a company called Zastava in Serbia, and it was known for being the cheapest car that you could buy in the United States because it was probably one of, if not the only Eastern European cars that was actually imported to the U.S. during its production. You know, you get some Ladas and stuff now, but that's mostly people importing them on their own as solo cars because they're interested in the car. But the Yugo was actually commercially sold in the U.S., also in Canada, I believe. And it was, like I said, known for being the cheapest car that you could buy, and boy was it cheap. It was not a very good car. It was notoriously not necessarily unreliable, but uncomfortable. It didn't have any amenities. I don't even think it had a radio. Or if it did, it was optional. Back when radios were optional. And I mean, this was produced in the 80s, so even then, radios were usually pretty standard. So the fact that the radio was optional really showed how unbelievably cheap the car was. But it's those kinds of cars that I enjoy. Just because there's, like with the electronics and stuff, there's just something about the way that they're produced and designed and all that that I just find incredibly interesting and appealing. I really like janky stuff that barely works or doesn't even work at all in some ways. I know that it makes my life harder to drive a car that barely runs, but there's just something entertaining about it. You know, every drive is an adventure. It's, something might happen. Your car might explode. It might suddenly crap out on you in the middle of a highway, in the middle of a pouring rain. And, there's just some deep kind of fucked up part of me that finds that incredibly entertaining. Let's see, what else? Yes, I'm also pretty interested in keyboards, but not new modern keyboards. They're all very similar. They're produced mainly the same way, using mainly the same switches, with only slight differences between the switch. I like old keyboards that are old, I guess. I just think they're very interesting because they do things in a very unique way. They don't really follow traditional rules of keyboards. Like, they all have very strange layouts. Up until the IBM Model M, which is a keyboard that a lot of people probably know of, the keyboard layout was not standard at all. The QWERTY alphanumeric layout was mostly standard, but the layout of switches, of keys like the tab key or the shift key or the alt key, those were essentially just thrown wherever there was space on the keyboard that the particular company was designing. They didn't really put any thought into where your fingers might actually be when you're trying to, say, capitalize keys or perform a, keyboard shortcut. So you'd end up with, like, the control key in the top right and the caps lock key on, like, basically the function row, and the tab key would be just some random location down at the bottom or something. The only thing that really remained consistent was the spacebar, or maybe the escape key if you were lucky. But aside from that, I also really enjoy these switch mechanisms. They just, I mean, they found a way to connect two wires together in basically every way imaginable. Did it with magnets, they did it with springs, they did it with, little contact pads on membranes. They did it basically any way that you could make an electrical connection momentarily. They thought of it and they made a keyboard using that switch design. And it led to a lot of very interesting keyboards, like these magnetic valve switches. I think they were the ITW magnetic valve. ITW was the company that made them. And they essentially work, if I remember correctly, by using magnets to adjust the flow of electrons in the wires so that they would go down one wire rather than the other. Absolutely insane design. I could be wrong on that, by the way. I'm kind of just talking out of my ass. I don't own any magnetic valve switches, unfortunately. But you also had switches that were more common and more normal, for lack of a better word, like the Alps switches, which were relatively common. The Alps was a electronics company from Japan that produced a lot of keyboard switches. The Alps switch, they made a number of different switches, but these, the ones that were produced the most, were actually pretty common in their day, arguably more common than cherry switches. But they usually used what was like a leaf spring instead of like a coil spring. In cherry switches, they used a leaf spring, and that would provide the spring. But there was just a number of insane designs. Back to the IBM Model M, it used a switch called the, as IBM dubbed it in the patent, the catastrophically buckling compression column switch and actuator, also more widely known as the buckling spring switch. And it is pretty self-explanatory. There's a little spring in there, and when you press down, it kind of goes out to the side and eventually buckles, kind of slaps against the side of the casing, which creates the very iconic clicking noise that the IBM Model M is known for, as well as the very characteristic tactility. But that spring kind of sliding out would, in the process, press down on a membrane, a rubber membrane, which would have two little conductive pads on them, which would connect the pads and would complete the circuit. Now, a lot of people know the IBM Model M as a mechanical keyboard, which it is, but it uses a membrane to actually complete the circuit. Now, there is an earlier version known as the IBM Model F, which does not use a membrane, but the IBM Model M does use a membrane, which a lot of people will probably find very interesting, at least if you're as much of a autistic nerd as I am. Let's see. Yes, clicky switches. Clicky switches have evolved a lot over the years. Because the clicking sound usually isn't a natural part of the mechanism. In the case of the Model M, it is. It comes from, the spring buckling. But oftentimes, it's created by a separate element in there, specifically designed to provide that clicking noise. For example, the very, very common Cherry MX Blue switch uses what's called a click jacket, which is a little ring of plastic around the key stem that when you press down, it kind of gets shot against the bottom of the switch, which makes the clicking noise. In the case of the Alps switches, it kind of presses down on the the leaf in a certain way, which causes it to kind of spring and hit something. I'm not super familiar with how they work. I don't exactly remember. It's like 11 at night and I'm a little tired, but yeah. And the some other common switches include a click bar, which is just a little piece of wire, a little bit of springy wire that gets pressed down and then released, and it kind of slaps against the casing. Anyways, I'm probably going to end this video here. At this point, I've kind of tried to record some extra stuff, but I just kind of endlessly ramble into nothingness and it never actually makes much sense. So I'm just gonna shut up. I hope you all have a wonderful night. I hope you enjoyed listening to this. If you have any feedback for me, if you enjoyed it, if you didn't, whatever, please feel free to let me know because I have no idea what I'm doing. So any feedback would be very appreciated. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful night and I hope you sleep well. Good night.